Because you guys know this is a channel of which I follow several beats, and domestic violence is one of those beats. Violence against women, gender-based violence, one of those beats that I follow, right? Why do I follow this beat? Well, because I am a survivor of domestic violence. And the wild thing is, you come to discover that there's a lot of people who are survivors of domestic violence. And to be clear, people of all genders and all gender identities can be victims of domestic violence, right? And the problem is we don't have the safety nets in place in our society in which people who are number one victims of domestic violence can get access to resources in a timely manner, right? It's starting to get better, but it's not 100%. And the other side of that is that I don't think there's a lot of help available for those who are the perpetrators of domestic violence. Like the help is jail, right? Or it's anger management, or some sort of court diversion, sentencing, or they don't get help at all. And they continue to terrorize um numerous people throughout their life, which I think is really unfortunate because I don't really have a lot of sympathy or compassion for sexual abusers and people who commit domestic violence, but I'm maybe I'm starting to get soft in my old age. Like I want the harmful people to get some help on the days that I don't want them pushed off a cliff, which is actually most days. I would prefer that they get pushed off a cliff. But oh Jesus, the moon must be in a weird phase right now. That solar eclipse must have did something. I'm having a little bit of empathy. I don't like it. I don't like having the empathy for the fuck boys and girls of the world. But anyway, so Will, if you could please pop up that CNN piece for me. Let's pop up the CNN article because um this was something I hadn't thought about until I saw a recent story on my local news. And that a number of states, and this piece is actually from 2020, and it started to detail a trend across some state lawmakers in places across the country that were really starting to take a serious re-examination of the criminal penalties and the criminal categorization of strangulation, specifically as it pertains to domestic violence. So strangulation is choking or the intentional suffocation of somebody, literally trying to deny another person air, is strangulation. And you'd be surprised, y'all, in a lot of places in America, strangulation still is prosecuted or categorized as a misdemeanor. In 2020, a number of states tried to change that. Washington, D.C., Ohio, and my state of Maryland. Um, and I I thought that this was actually a good thing, something that state lawmakers did that might benefit the people or the survivors. You hear me? I'm incredulous in my tone because I don't believe that government can solve a lot of things. But when it comes to some of the long-standing ills in our society, such as domestic violence, I think it's important that lawmakers have the laws reflect the seriousness of the crime, right? And as we're talking about crime and the rise in crime, no, domestic violence is a fucking crime. Like that is crime. Like niggas and people who commit these acts against their partners or even against children, right? Children too can be survivors and victims of domestic violence. Something needs to be done with these motherfuckers. And in the state of Maryland, the penalties have increased. In fact, Maryland went from making strangulation, it was prior to 2020 simply a misdemeanor. Now is a felony. And there was a story that was on the local news. Well, if you could get that News 4 story queued up. Y'all know I use a lot of News 4 stories because I they are my source um of media critique. Like I study them. I've been a long time viewer of NBC4 Washington. I've seen the quality of their storytelling and their overall reporting really go down over about the past 10 or so years. So anyway, I like to pick on them, but I still watch. So I'm a faithful viewer. So call that what you will. Am I a hater? Possibly. Possibly. But this particular reporter, I really like the work that they do. Her name is Darcy Spencer. I'm gonna give Darcy Spencer overall a B plus as a local reporter. Darcy Spencer is Jane on the spot. And she took this story about a domestic abuse survivor who almost lost their life in Prince George's County to their abuser. And now there has been a sentence given in this case where this woman's partner almost killed her down at the damn National Harbor at the Gaylord Hotel at a nice place, right? Nice place. Domestic violence can happen anywhere in the home, in public, at the casino, hotel. And I want us to take a look at this piece. This is from NBC4 Washington. Darcy Spencer's reporting. Let's take a look.
Farley says she was in an abusive relationship for years with the father of their young son. But it's what happened here in a room at the Gaylord Hotel at National Harbor last December that gave her the strength to leave for good. She says she lost consciousness while Bruce Godfrey strangled her in that room.
I was 4 seconds away from dying in front of my child.
According to charging documents, Godfrey had abused her for hours, took her phone, and held her and her son against their will. The little boy begged him not to kill his mother.
He locked the door, told her that he was going to kill her and that he was going to be the only one coming out alive from that room.
But when Godfrey fell asleep, she was able to alert hotel staff, who then called police. Here is some of that call made to Prince George's 911.
She don't want nobody to knock on the door. She just wants them to come in.
Officers rescued Farley and her son. She documented her injuries with these photos. Prosecutors say she had broken blood vessels in her eyes, scratches and bruising on her throat and body.
A victim of strangulation is 7 to 8 times more likely to end up being a victim of homicide.
Prosecutors charged Godfrey with strangulation. They secured a conviction, and on Thursday he was sentenced to serve 16 years behind bars. In 2020, a new law went into effect here in Maryland, making strangulation a felony instead of a misdemeanor.
That their abusers are given stiff and tough penalties, and that they are put away for a very long time.
Farley says a weight has been lifted from her shoulders.
I did not want to raise a child in domestic violence. I did not want my son to hurt anybody when he got older. I wanted my kid to be a happy, vibrant child, and I was ruining it for him by bringing him back into this situation.
Farley is now looking forward to her future. She's earning her bachelor's degree, gaining financial stability, and starting a new job. In Largo, Darcy Spencer, News 4.
Farley is pushing for a national database of domestic violence abusers that could be accessed for free, similar to a sex offender registry.
That is interesting. Well, hold on, a couple of things there. First of all, for the survivor there, Jessica Farley, for her to say towards the end that she did not want her son to grow up and hurt somebody, that is a heater of a statement, because that is the reality for a lot of people who are perpetrators of domestic violence. It is something that they witnessed and they experienced as children in their formidable years. They saw violence in the home, so they perpetuate and continue to repeat that same violence when they become of age, and then they find themselves in relationships, and they don't have the skills to resolve conflicts or to de-escalate or whatever, so they revert back to their default settings, what they saw growing up. So I commend her for being aware, first of all, potentially of the patterns that could be repeated if she survived and decided to remain in that relationship with her abusive former partner. So there's that. The idea about the database I thought is kind of interesting, and that's really the only place that I've heard that. Have you guys ever heard that before? Maybe you have to find Jessica Farley and see where she's talking about this idea. I think that is a brilliant idea. I think domestic abusers should be cataloged, and you should be able to access publicly whether or not a person. I'm supposing in the interest of fairness, like maybe we would have to do convictions, but also knowing how fucked up the system is and how a lot of times domestic abusers go free in spite of evidence or whatever credible accounts. Maybe just the simple charging, or I don't know. I don't think it should be some. I don't think someone should make a domestic abuser database based simply off an accusation. Like there has to be some sort of legal paperwork, or something formal has to have occurred in the interest of fairness, because I can understand that, yeah, some people would be mistakenly put on such a list because of, there are false allegations out there. Not It's not the overwhelming majority of domestic violence reports, but it happens, right? So anyway, but I agree and support the idea, because I think that sex offender databases are very helpful. I think it serves a public interest. This is information that the public is entitled to know. Um, and I think domestic abusers should be cataloged and have a publicly accessible database in a similar way. Because for those who have survived, these kinds of relationships, that those people, the abusers, are extremely manipulative. They are quite convincing. They're quite charming. I mean, that is the nature of their, psychopathy or sociopathy, whatever it is. They're supposed to present well. Like they're not so like a good domestic abuser. Like he's not coming off as a domestic abuser. He's coming off as the greatest nigga ever, right? Until right until but I think that would be valuable to the dating population to know who has been accused of what, who was convicted of what. And this goes for, women who are accused and convicted of domestic abuse also. Um, 16 years. Mr. Godfrey will be behind bars. Well, maybe, because in the state of Maryland, as we have done here on previous stories, you can earn good credits in the state of Maryland. Is especially if you beat bitches, right? You can work your way out of out of an attempted murder sentence. You can work your way out of a strangulation in the state of Maryland if you decide to, participate in that prison labor force. They'll give you some good credits. They'll give all the domestic abusers and rapists, they'll give them niggas some time served and shit, because that's what the fuck system we live in. Jesus fucking capitalism will let abusers work off their sentence so they can get out of jail sooner. Ain't this a bitch? But hold on, back to my story. So, Maryland did this. Ohio did this, meaning made strangulation a felony. I believe strangulation is a felony in North Carolina. I think strangulation is a felony in South Carolina. No, I might have that wrong. I think it's just North Carolina. Indiana, there's a number of states that have started to take this more seriously. And we're going to have to, everybody, because I think that domestic violence is a societal scourge that can actually be remedied. Yes, I understand. We all came up under capitalism, white supremacy, misogyny. I get all that. I get all that. But if the women them, if the women, if if women who have been raised under these same oppressive conditions manage not to beat these niggas half to fucking death, manage not to rape them at the same levels, I think, I think we can somehow instruct the men and the boys to not engage in this behavior. But it starts early, and they need to know that there are consequences such as these. Now we know that longer prison sentences, even capital punishment, often are not deterrents to crime, especially to violent crime. But this is different, in my opinion. Domestic violence is different than robbery. It's even a little different than homicide, right? Like some crimes, like robbery and burglary, all them shits. I mean, those shits are crimes of means of urgency. Sometimes people rob and burglarize because they need to eat, right? Domestic violence is not, it's not that. It's a lack of interpersonal relations that exclude violence, right? And I think we can teach children, people in our society, how to engage with one another without resorting to violence, right? But it's something that I think has to start early. And the markers, in the same way, one of the people that we saw in that piece was the Prince George's County State's Attorney. Her name is Aisha Braveboy. Aisha Braveboy and her predecessor, who's the county executive now, Angela Alsobrooks, who used to be the state's attorney, both of them in their platforms when they were running for that office made it clear that they were going to focus on domestic abusers and make examples out of them. And to the extent that, prosecutors' job wholly is to put people in jail, which we don't want, but in the interim, I don't know where to put the abusers, put them niggas in jail until we figure this shit out. That is part of their political platform, I'll say, that I agree with. Because and if we're not training people, children and people, adults, how not to harm and kill with their hands, unfortunately we have to put those people away from the rest of us, because we know that behavior um is it is repeated. It's a pattern. Most domestic abusers don't just beat the one person. They usually that's how they be in relationship. They beat their partners, plural, right? So until we get a hold of that, I think we do have to put the abusers in jail. Okay, we got to put the abusers in jail. But for lawmakers to make sure that crimes as agreed to. Oh, I'm sorry. No, the point that I was trying to make. Aisha Braveboy in the piece said that survivors, or pardon me, victims of strangulation are 7 times more likely to die as a result of a homicide. Okay, if we are able to pinpoint statistics as clear as that, there are definitely personality and behavior markers that can be identified in kids and young people, young adults, that denote a propensity towards being physically violent, right? And I think it's important that we get a hold of them and not to punish them punitively while they're young, but to get a hold of them and make sure that they get access to services, mental health services, interpersonal relationship services, instruction in that direction, so they don't grow up to become these violent, harmful people that traumatize numerous people over and over again. I think that's possible, guys. But the problem is, we're not going to get to such a sophisticated healthcare system, mental health care system on top of that, while we're funding the Israeli military to the tune of $3.8 billion a year. Okay? Because with all the money we send into Israel, we could set up all kinds of beneficial programs that would help everybody in this country, right? For America to be a less violent place, maybe. For our intimate partner relationships to not be so fraught with violence, and for there not to be so many people who have experienced domestic violence and sexual violence, but domestic violence for the purposes of this. So I wanted to just bring y'all that story. I appreciate the state of Maryland and other states that have taken policy actions to make certain that domestic abusers at least get stiffer sentences. To the extent that they're going to be sitting in jail longer, I can't really say, because again, like I said, state of Maryland will let out a murderer. they will let out the rapist and the attempted murderer, or for good behavior, right? So I can't say this man is going to do the whole 16 in jail. He might be able to work his way out of it. But at least something is what better than nothing. So there.